Welcome to our annual event marking the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Thank you so much for sharing in this very important community event. How's the sound? Everybody hear me? Okay. A little soft? We're going to make a few adjustments as we get started here. Great. So we are really proud every year to honor the legacy and the work of Dr. King by focusing on a topic that he would have cared about deeply were he still with us. And given that 2020 marks the centennial of women's suffrage, we thought a panel tonight called Women's Vote and Power at 100 resonated with the community and really would mark his work and this moment in a meaningful way. So tonight we are going to cover a range of issues from the right to vote, to women running for office, to the intersection of gender and race, to harassment, sexual harassment in the workplace. And we are so very honored to have such a distinguished panel of experts with us here this evening. I'm going to introduce them both, but why don't we welcome them with our applause. Logistics. We want you to know that we are live streaming on Facebook right now. We are also videotaping this event. Thank you to a student from Greenwich Academy for doing that. And we will also have a question and answer portion to tonight's discussion. And so when you came in, you all should have gotten a piece of paper and a pencil. And so feel free during the evening to give your piece of paper, your question to a staff person. They're all wearing an orange lanyard like this, and we hope you will submit some questions and join the conversation. Before I introduce our special guests individually, I do want to acknowledge some folks that are with us tonight. First, our State Senator Alex Bernstein is here with us. Representative Steve Meskers, who I think is that way. And our very newly elected state representative, Harry Aurora. State Representative Libby Florin was going to be here at the last minute. She sends her best wishes. Fred Camillo, our first selectman, sends his best wishes. And I want to acknowledge also our select person, Jill Oberlander. So when you came in this evening, I hope you saw the display out in the lobby. It's an amazing compilation called Rise Up Sisters that was created by the Connecticut Women's Hall of Fame, and I think Sarah LaFarce.
She's right there.
Sarah. There she is. Hi, Sarah. In partnership with the Connecticut Historical Society, and they have put together really a mobile display that's going to travel around the state throughout 2020. So we have been really pleased to have that here, Sarah, this week, and I hope you see it tonight as well as around the state in the coming year. I also want to recognize the work of the Greenwich Historical Society and really raising awareness about the Connecticut women who paved the way and were heavily involved in passing the 19th Amendment. Their exhibition, An Unfinished Revolution, the Women's Suffrage Centennial, is going to be opening on February 5th, and I can't wait to see it, and we really encourage all of you to go see this as well. Another sister organization I do want to mention is monumentalwomen.org. And if any of you know Colleen Jenkins from Greenwich, and we have a student here, she's in the RTM, and of course a longtime friend of the YWCA, her great-great-grandmother was Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And so Colleen, is very involved in an organization that is bringing statues of women, of which there are none, in Central Park. And so on August 26th, which is the actual day to mark the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, there will be an unveiling of a statue of Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So let's all go down to Central Park on August 26th with Colleen Jenkins. I think it's going to be for decades, first as his time as our Attorney General and now as a United States Senator. He regrets that he could not be here this evening, but he did send a message, so we're just going to play that on the screen.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard Blumenthal, your United States Senator, and I want to thank you for giving me this great opportunity to participate in the YWCA's annual event honoring Dr. Martin Luther King. I apologize that I'm unable to be with you in person, but please know I'm there in spirit. I've had the wonderful pleasure and honor of attending so many YWCA events and have seen firsthand the amazing professionalism and dedication of the Y's staff and volunteers under the forward-looking leadership of Mary Lee Kiernan. The YWCA has a powerful history of community engagement and encouraging women to thrive and to lead. Dr. King was an inspiring leader who left a legacy and a vision of service. His legacy is one that we should all respect and live out in our own lives. And I share with you a profound respect for this historic figure, Dr. King, and to recognize our ongoing need as a society to uphold his dream. Today, the YWCA honors his legacy and his commitment to equal rights by hosting an expert panel on empowering women. It coincides with the centennial of women fighting for and gaining the right to vote. I'm proud to stand with you. I'm proud to stand with everyone in this room and many others in the fight for women's equality, whether it be on issues of health and safety, equal pay for equal work, reproductive freedom, or encouraging more women to run for public office. Please know you have my full support. As we know, progress is hardly achieved overnight, nor does it happen when only a handful of people are engaged in trying to affect change. Progress happens incrementally. It's due to work that we do together to fight for a more perfect union. Dr. King's work as well. Today's panelists are uniquely qualified to discuss these issues, and I'm sure their discussion will be extremely thoughtful and insightful. Cheryl Battles, Gretchen Carlson, Denise Merrill, and Patty Rusin are all really good friends and extraordinarily accomplished, and I thank them for taking the time to participate in this wonderful event. And thank you to everyone in attendance for your advocacy, your dedication to the empowerment of women in our nation. I look forward to working with you, fighting with you, and being on your side. Thanks so much.
So before I introduce the panel tonight, one last thank you to our 36 community partners that really co-sponsored this event. You see all of their logos, I think, on the screen, and in the program, it includes the town, the police department, who we work with on a daily basis in connection with our domestic violence services, houses of worship, nonprofits across the community, and each year we come together as a coalition to mark Dr. King's birthday, and we just want to acknowledge and thank them. Many representatives are here tonight, so we thank you for your partnership. Now to our panel. These inspirational women have been working against the barriers to women's equality and advancement head-on for years. And you have detailed bios in the program, and it's really extraordinary to learn about what they have accomplished and what they've done in their lives. So let me start with Cheryl Battle. Cheryl is the Vice President of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement at Pitney Bowes. Cheryl is a recognized leader in her industry and beyond. She is passionate about driving results by honoring diversity, looking for common bonds, and empowering women in her company and throughout the region. Gretchen Carlson is a well-known commentator, journalist, and author who paved the way for the Me Too movement with her historic 2016 sexual harassment complaint against the chairman of Fox News, Roger Ailes. Through her new nonprofit, Lift Our Voices, Gretchen and her partners are changing how we think about corporate non-disclosure agreements. Denise Merrill is the Connecticut Secretary of the State. Now in her third term, Denise has long supported and expanded democratic participation and accountability. And during her 17 years as a leader in the Connecticut General Assembly, she has supported groundbreaking legislation that promotes gender equity. And Patricia Russo, Patty. Patty is the executive director of the campaign school at Yale University. Patty has spent her career in private, public, and nonprofit organizations centered on women's rights. At the campaign school, she runs the most influential, the best, nonpartisan, issue-neutral political campaign training program for those interested in running for office or in campaign management. Thank you to each of you for taking the time to be with us tonight. It's very special to have the four of you together in one place. Please help me thank them. Before we start tonight's conversation talking about the vote, naturally, and who best really to kick it off but the Secretary of the State. In your role as you oversee and protect and promote the voting process, Denise, please start us off with your thoughts on how the vote was won and some of the parallels that you're seeing today.
Well, thank you very much for having me tonight. Yes, it is on my mind this year. And I feel like very much like voting is in the spotlight this year for a whole lot of reasons. First of all, I can tell you that I took it upon myself to start a commission on the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage this year in Connecticut. So we're trying to coordinate and unite a lot of efforts that are going to go along around this. And so I've had the opportunity myself to start learning about what actually happened. And I knew pretty much what all of you know, the rough outline of what went on. Boy, have I learned a lot. I guess the thing that struck me the most was the fact that this was the greatest expansion of democracy in the history of the nation. 28 million women, just like that, overnight, got the vote once it was finally ratified. And that was really, it was both a blessing and a curse in a way, because that's why everyone was so scared about what was going to happen when all those women got the vote. And it really does a lot to explain why it actually went through, because when you think about it, they had to convince all the men to let them vote. And so that sort of fascinated me right from the beginning. I've read a lot of very interesting books, and I would recommend many of them to you. The one that struck me the most was something called The Women's Hour by Elaine Weiss, who was here speaking in the state not long ago. And what struck me about her book, and I think it is about to become a movie this year, just so was that she took that moment of ratification, which was Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify the amendment that took so long in coming. 75 years. I mean, think about that. It started really, they date it from Seneca Falls in 1848. But for a long, long time, those founding mothers of this whole idea struggled along, trying to get it passed in the various states, bringing it forward to Congress. But nothing much happened, honestly, for a long, long time. And then along around World War I, which had a lot to do with changing people's thinking about women, by the way, because they kicked in for the war effort. Suddenly women were doing a lot of jobs that had not been done before. And as a result, it changed, I think, a lot of people, including President Wilson, mind about this whole idea of women voting. But also at the same time, a group of much younger women came along in their 20s. One of them, very famous one, spent a lot of time in Connecticut, Alice Paul, said, "We're tired of waiting. We're going to burn the place down," and they did. It was not a genteel movement from that time on. They went on hunger strikes. They picketed the White House. They tried to take President Wilson out, by the way, before he came around. And it was brutal. They were jailed, they were force-fed, one of them died in prison. This was not your mother's revolution, you know, and so as all movements develop, and it's very similar to what I see going on today, you can see the parallels already. There are a group of younger women coming along and saying, we're not gonna put up with it anymore. We're gonna take action. And you know, this is the history of all political movements. You know, what struck me about these people, they were politicians. They were arguably the first lobbyists ever. They went and buttonholed people in Congress and in the states. They did the marches. The marches were very well planned and executed. They were the first groups that had ever come up with these kinds of methods of getting what they wanted. And so I think we can learn a lot from everything they did, and we have learned a lot. If you look at almost every major movement today, they are copying a lot of what they saw these women do. And they had a lot to do with what happened later with the other nonviolent movements of our time. So I'm kind of proud of these women. I'm happy to stand on their shoulders. But I have to say it was an incomplete revolution. While 28 million women did get the vote, there were those who still did not actually have the vote. And that was women of color. Of course, it was many years until we gave Asian American women the right to vote, or men. Native Americans did not get the vote for a long time. So even though these rights were established, first after the Civil War with the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and then with the 19th Amendment, it really wasn't actualized until the Voting Rights Acts of 1964 and 65, because it had to be enforced. And there is a long history here of a connection with racism in the South particularly, but also many of the suffragists were also abolitionists. So it's a complicated story, and it makes me renew my vow to make sure that every person in this country who is eligible to vote is not only registered, and frankly, we're still not there. We think there's about 25% of people in this country who are eligible to vote, but have not even bothered to register for whatever reason. That's upsetting. And of the people who are voting, there is still a substantial number that do not actually show up to vote, even though they've registered. Now, the good news is, in the last 4 years, since our last presidential election, we have had a surge in registration in this country, particularly among young people and women. So there's something going on. I'm glad to be part of it. I will push as hard as I can to make sure that everyone can actually actualize their vote, not just get it on paper, but really be able to combat what I see is going on right now, which is a renewed effort to restrict the vote. It's a balance. It's gone on for years, 100 years now. It ebbs and flows. And we made a lot of progress in the last, maybe the second half of the 20th century. There was a lot of progress in making sure that everyone was actually able to vote. And now there's been some backsliding. And frankly, it's been around issues like more restrictive ID laws, purging of people off voter lists. So these things are always a balance, but right now I think it behooves all of us more than ever to fight to maintain the things that these women fought for, and we will continue to fight for it. It is a continuum, and we all have to renew our interest in this every single year.
So we want to. Each of our speakers on this topic of the vote. Dr. King said, and you have this quote in your program, so long as I do not firmly and irrevocably possess the right to vote, I do not possess myself. I cannot make up my mind. It is made up for me. So why don't we start with Cheryl? What does that quote mean to you? What does the vote mean to you?
That quote, first of all, thank you so much for having this event, and I'm so honored to be among these panelists. This is just wonderful. That quote and the right to vote are very personal to me. It literally, our maternal family surname speaks to the fact that we did not possess ourselves. It's Cotton. So according to family history, our foremother had to finish her quota of picking cotton that day before she could lay down and give birth. And then they gave that child the surname Cotton. My grandfather's generation was the last generation to actually have that name. So on election day, 2008, I took my 7-year-old daughter, had her late for Greenwich Country Day that day, and I reiterated this story to her as we stood there in front of the ballot. And I told her, I want you to understand that these hands that literally were named for what we picked in servitude are about to pick the leader of the free world. Don't ever forget the sacrifice and the struggle and the ultimate triumph to get the right to vote. And every election since then, I have taken her with me to watch me vote. She is now a freshman at Elon University, and she is so excited about being able to vote in 2020. And that's what the quote and the vote means to me.
Gretchen, your thoughts on the vote and the quote?
Well, I don't know how you top that story. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for having me here tonight as well. I mean, I just want to echo as well that I think it's so important to bring your children with you when you go to do this monumental, privilege. I like to see it as a privilege and a right. But I have done the same thing with my 2 children. Actually, my son, who's 14 now, just said to me the other day when we were talking about the election and actually the impeachment. He said, "Mom, I get to vote for president in 2024." And I thought, wow, his wheels are already turning and he's thinking, that far in advance. I would just say that for me personally, my mission over the last 3.5 years has also been to vote for what I believe in and to vote for standing up. So I think that statement is even bigger than just going to the ballot box. I think that to be a whole person and really have the rights that we were intended to have, it's much deeper than just casting the vote. It's about speaking up too for human injustice, which has become my mission over the last 3 years. I would just end with saying that I truly believe that seeing is believing. And I actually wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about this maybe 2 years ago, about why we have never had a female president in the United States of America. And I equated The Crown, if any of you have ever watched that show, with why Great Britain has been successful in having female prime ministers. And my analysis was that seeing is believing. If you watch the beginning of The Crown and you see the Queen in her 20s making these huge decisions that affected their entire country, that was seeing is believing, right? And even though the monarchy now is just a figurehead, I believe that people who have grown up and lived over generations in Great Britain saw women in powerful positions. And so they believed that they could actually get there. And I was making the argument that we don't necessarily see that as much here in this country. But we're going to do it. We are going to do it. So that, to me, voting and becoming a whole person is much broader than just going to cast your vote. Right? Thank you.
Your thoughts on the vote and the quote?
Well, how many of you have Italian moms? Okay, just easier. My mom was 4 foot something, president of the League of Women Voters. Okay, so it's so much easier to say yes to her. I mean, One of my proudest moments in high school, growing up in New Jersey, was when we were all seniors in high school, and here came the League of Women Voters with the flag, and then you got a flag, and they were registering all of us, all 600 of us, to register to vote. That was such a solemn, phenomenal moment, pivotal moment in my life. And so as a result of that, I mean, with her constantly inspiring, should I say, all of us, I'm one of 4, to vote and never miss a vote, and a primary counts, even more importantly sometimes than the general, I couldn't even fathom not voting. Even when we lived in Tokyo for 3 years, it just didn't occur to me. It was just not something that was a part of who I am, you know, as a person. It was really thanks to her. And then the subliminal messaging that I got from my father. Back in the 60s, he was constantly on a bus off to protest the war, the Vietnam War. So I was like, where's Daddy? He's not gonna be home tonight. He's on a bus somewhere. I don't know where the hell he's going, but, you know. So just seeing that, and you know, you talk about seeing and being it, and just, it's like, it's the fabric of who you are. So then what happens is, you meet people who don't vote, and you're like, what's wrong with you? What are you kidding? What is wrong with you? You know, you're missing out. You don't get to whine about who's in office. Guess what? Stop it. I'm hearing this. I want to hear this. Because you don't get to do that because you don't vote, right? So that was just something that was just so a part of who we are as a crazy Italian family. It was like, of course you're voting. Who's voting? Who wants to come with me? It was, and again, being Italian, it was all around. Well, we're going to vote, then we're going to go out to eat. Cousins, you know. So it was a party. And even though, you know, we've all voted differently, always. We always have these great conversations about why we voted the way we do, and that's just happening again. You know, that hasn't happened in a long time. So even when I started out 30 years ago here in Connecticut when we moved here, and I was the director of Planned Parenthood down here, I had voter registration in the clinic. It's like, you're gonna wait an hour to be seen? You might as well register to vote. So there are so many ways that you can be a leader that you don't even know. And that I was inspired by that from both of my parents in their own way, which is why I have proudly have never missed a vote.
So voting is a foundational step, right, in civic participation. And another important step is to run for office. So let's talk about women in public governance world for a little bit. And back to Patty, who again runs the best campaigns in the country. What barriers do you think women face? A lot of them are self-imposed, and in the challenging process of running for public office, and what are you teaching your students at the campaign school?
Well, not to out her, but Mary Lee is one of my rock star grads. You can be a leader anywhere for all good, you know, and again, the other thing that I love is when people say they don't vote, it's like, stop whining, or I'm not political. That's my second favorite. Oh, it's so great that you do what you do, but I'm not political. If you're not political, everything in life is political. Negotiating at home with your family, with your spouse, with your kids, that's political. Work, it's a jungle out there, right? It's political. Everything in your life is political. So if you don't become political, it's like you're leading a half life. You know, that's where all the juiciness, the fun is, right? I think, right? Kind of worked out for me. One of some of the challenges. Our school was created in 1992. Some of you are old enough to remember 1992. It was the year of the woman. Every 20 years, we'd cycle out, we'd get our own year. 1992, that was our first year. I was here in Connecticut, was working with Rosa DeLauro, who's in Congress, our congresswoman from the 3rd Congressional District. And there were all these phenomenal women, both on the Democratic and Republican side, running for Congress and the United States Senate that year, coming into Connecticut for fundraising. Back then, we were very flush. We had a lot of money. We were helping all these amazing women who were running. Carol Moseley Braun, a Democrat from Illinois, was running for the United States Senate. First African-American woman in her own right running for Senate. Ann Richards came a couple of times. She was running for governor. I said, one more time, Ann, and we're going to be, talking about how we can get you into our state and run here. So there was all this amazing energy that many of you remember, and many of those women, the majority of those women, ran and won that year. So we had critical mass, and we're feeling pretty smug, right? We're feeling pretty good. Oh, we have finally crashed that glass ceiling, and women are going to see, wow, if these women can do it, why not me, right? And then 1993 happened, and it was as if 1992 was like a fantasy, like it never happened. There were all these phenomenal men, who were new to politics, who were running, but not women. So Rosa DeLauro, when Rosa calls you into her office, again, she's another one, Italian, here's the theme of my life. You just don't say no to Rosa DeLauro. And a woman by the name of Andre Brooks, who's from Westport, who had a big, big dream. And her big, big dream was to have a campaign school dedicated to getting more women in the pipeline. What are the challenges? What are the barriers? The list is as endless as your imagination. I'm not good enough. I'm not qualified. I'm waiting for the perfect moment, right? I'm busy at home with my kids. I'm working full time. I'm going to wait for the perfect moment. Or my favorite, I'm waiting to be asked. I've been active in my party for 20 years. I'm waiting to be asked. And I say, it's not the prom. You don't have to wait. Rutgers, our friends at Rutgers, the Center for American Women in Politics, say that a woman has to be asked at least 3 times before she even thinks seriously about running for office. Now we're seeing a difference. We are seeing an amazing sea change because we had 92, and then we had 10 bad years. We were in free fall. It's like a bad roller coaster ride, women running for office. The past 4 years have been a gift. So once the election was behind us, we started getting an inordinate number of calls and emails. What am I going to do? I can't believe this happened. Now, I am not a therapist. I don't play one on TV, but I certainly felt like I was counseling all these women who were calling who were just despondent. And I said, once you start getting dressed again, once you bring up the Ben & Jerry's, call us back. You need to grieve. You need to grieve. So then they started marching, and you'll recall that was the first global women's march that we had. How many of you marched somewhere? Guys, women, right? It was phenomenal, right? We all remember that moment. That Sunday, my phone's ringing off the hook. This is my idea of a good time on a Sunday. I'm in front of my laptop returning those calls. This woman calls, hi, I'm Anna, I'm from Akron. I'm mad, I marched, I want to run for office. Great, thanks for calling, Anna. Where are you registered to vote in Akron? Oh, I'm not registered to vote, but I'm mad now, and I'm going to run. Anna, you're not. You're not. I'm going to save you the $65 application fee. You are not coming to Yale Law School to be trained. Not yet. Not yet. Let me give you the name and address of your local registrar of voters. You're going to register. You're going to be the first one tomorrow morning to register to vote. Then I'm going to give you a political homework assignment. I may see you again or never, but that's what you've got to do first. A third of the women who reached out to us after that march were not registered to vote. Let's just take that in, right, based on what Denise has just, shared with you. The second third, well, of course I'm registered to vote. Great. Oh, but I didn't vote in the presidential because the 2 candidates were so similar, I just couldn't make up my mind. You too are not coming. I'm going to give you a local political homework assignment. Maybe we'll see you again, maybe never. So 2/3 of the women who reached out to us after that first march, they were not ready for training. They weren't. They didn't have the foundation or the skill set that you need. You know you need a tough skin to run for office, to put yourself out there. They were not ready. So my concern was, oh my God, they're gonna get out there, they're gonna think they're ready, they're gonna read a book, they're gonna go to a webinar and think, okay, I'm ready, I'm gonna run for Congress. And then they get annihilated. They don't just lose, they get annihilated. And then we never see them again. And there goes our pipeline that we're desperately trying to create. And Denise knows, she's a former president of the board of the campaign school. And we're on this treadmill that we cannot get off. So I said, you know what? We need to create a one-day training for women who don't have this skill set, but they have a newly discovered passion for politics. But they're not ready for a 5-day intensive. Everybody's ready for a one-day intensive. Do you have a passion for politics? Are you excited? Are you energized? Are you breathing? Are you ready to be a leader and step up? You need to join us. So that was created 3.5 years ago. We've trained close to 3,000 people, mostly women, a couple of guys, who are now out there either being a leader in their community, working on campaigns, getting ready to run, because once they see all that is involved in getting to run, they're like, whoa, wow, I dodged a bullet. I could have really embarrassed myself, right? So that's what's been so great. We're doing a one-day training at Yale Divinity School this Saturday, sold out. So that's what has been so exciting about this moment. We continue to surge. We have more and more men who are calling us, who are saying, I need to come to the one day. I'm running a campaign for a woman, and I know that there are challenges that she faces. I don't have a clue. I'm a white guy. What do I know? Patty, let me in. You're in. We need guys too. You know, we need guys in this. And you know, anytime a guy decides he's going to work on a woman's campaign or write a check, they become the cool guy on that campaign. I see it time and time again. Let them be the cool guy on your campaign, because then they bring in all the other cool guys, and you're raising a load of money. So it's all good. We need everybody. It's all hands on deck. So I think that the way to end many of these barriers is with exemplary training and with a mentoring component. So in addition to you having a phenomenal time, we work you hard. We stay in touch with our grads. We're a phone call away, an email away. The mentoring piece for a female candidate most especially is key, because we all have our moments when we feel small, right? Women more so, right? Oh my God, they don't like me. Or, you know, they don't like the way I'm dressed. They don't like what they're saying. I can't find my campaign manager. My finance director's costing me more money than raising me more money. Something's wrong, you know, and something's wrong with me. Just having a bad day. Get over it. So we shift their energy. We're not there to fix it, but we're there to lift you up. And so that connection, that sisterhood, as we refer to it, makes all the difference. I think it's a combination.
So Denise, you were in the General Assembly, of course, for 17 years, and of course you've been in the executive branch as a constitutional officer since 2011. What have you observed of women got elected, came to Hartford? What has been their barriers to being more productive or advancing further?
Well, after all that Patty just told you about getting elected, if you're still alive, you win, then what? And that is certainly a question that confronts every one of us. I came in a special election, much like one of the new representatives here. I remember, you know, when you come in a special election, you don't know anybody. Everybody else has kind of become a team, you know. And so I didn't even know where the bathrooms were. It was really hard. What are the barriers for women? There's a lot of them. I think, again, it's changed over time. But building on something Gretchen said that struck me, and as well as all the things Patty's been describing, is I think we have a lack of role models, if you will. there haven't been, in the 30 years I've been running for office, we're sort of stuck at around 30% women, in spite of the fact that women are more likely to register to vote, more likely to vote, in fact, vote in bigger numbers nationally. But somehow, this running for office thing is really hard for us. And even once you win, we don't have the same structures in place that men do. I mean, the whole golf club thing, for example, and the networking that they kind of have inherited. We still have to build that. And it's not easy, because there's a lot of reasons that things separate you. And especially now, politics is such a blood sport. It is tough. Patty's right, you've got to have a very thick skin, and every person has their own style, but for example, I became the majority leader of my party. I was only the second woman ever, I like to say in 350 years, since I'm from Connecticut, that had attained a position of leadership. And ever since then, which was at least a decade ago, people said, how the heck did you do that? How did you become the leader of a group of people that were mostly men? And I'll tell you, it was not easy. It was tedious. It was, a lot of it has to do with persistence and just the simple fact that you think you can do it. The biggest hurdle women face, I think, is sort of self-prevention. We don't think we can do it. We don't think we ever know enough to really put ourselves out there as a leader. We're kind of scared of the word power, which is what this is all about in the end. And I think a lot of us think that if we just have great ideas and we're really loud about things, that somehow we'll be perceived as a leader. And I think the thing I found out about putting yourself out as a leader is that people need to trust you. Trust that you will take care of them, not yourself. And put their interests, in some cases, above your own. And that's when you feel like people then will say, okay, I see you as a leader because I know I can trust you. And that trust is very hard to build. And that goes back to this whole idea that you have networks where you get to know each other socially. And what's missing in politics today is we don't talk to each other anymore. And it's tragic. It has changed so dramatically since I first came into politics in the early 90s. In the early 90s in Connecticut, which is a small state, and the capital is a very kind of intimate place, unlike many states. Everybody hangs out in the cafeteria together, for example. There's no special dining room or any of that. And lobbyists, legislators, everyone is sort of in the same place, and it's pretty democratic, small d. But now, it's almost like you're in a bad high school where people sit at different tables depending on what clique they're in or what group they're in. I have tried, frankly, even since I've been away from all that, to create kind of a social space in my office in the Capitol. I have a very beautiful office, first floor of the Capitol, and that's where the legislators go for many, many, many hours to pass laws. And they're upstairs on the second floor. And they have to be there. So they're not going far. So I have tried to become kind of like the social place where everybody can hang out. And either party, I am known for being someone who reaches across the aisle. I was once voted most effective legislator and most respected by the other side of the aisle. And I really treasure that, especially today. And so I kind of tried it, but there's a lot of forces against it. You are seen as deserting your team if you even talk to the other party these days. Even here in Connecticut, it's becoming a real problem. And it's not just issues. There are all kinds of things, all kinds of sports analogies all the time. You're fighting for your team. It's a really poisonous idea, and will hurt all of us in the end. So if we can do more mentoring, I think, trying to bring people along, trying to bring people back together, even in very fundamentally social ways. Don't even go around, what we agree on or what we don't agree on. We're all human beings. We can all talk to each other. And I think I see that as the biggest barrier, more to women than to men. for precisely the reason that we don't have those mentoring structures. And the campaign school has done a wonderful job of doing that for candidates. We need that for people who are actually in office, so we can learn from each other.
Let's talk now to the challenges and the opportunities and really the power of women of color. We acknowledge here at the YWCA and operate with an understanding of intersectionality and really the impact of the combination of race and gender, and our entire federation of YWCAs operates that way. We have up on the screen, I think, a metric on the intersection of race and gender, one way that it can be illustrated, which is the pay gap for women in the state and the pay gap for women of color, which is extraordinary. So Cheryl, please give us your thoughts on both the challenges and the power of women of color.
So let me start by saying none of us on this panel, just as we see the sea of variety in this room, we understand that on this panel, women don't have a monolithic voice or opinion. We're offering our personal perspective. Similarly, I am not the voice of women of color, but I do have a definitive perspective on it. So let's start with, why does pay matter? Dr. Martin Luther King ultimately was a humanist, and he was very much so about the dignity and respect for humans, and that's why he was really so focused on equity for all of those human beings. So when you think about the humanity that unites us, we all want to be respected. We all want to have our skills valued and appropriately compensated. And we're all looking for a quality of life in which we have access to food and housing and education and healthcare. That's table stakes. So when you think about work then, the theory is that when I provide my skills to an employer, the compensation that I get for those skills equates to the value that I'm providing. The unfortunate reality, when you think about the gender pay gap, is that women's work, and I'll put that in quotes, has historically been undervalued. And as we see in these statistics, women of color are even below that. So what are the implications? Well, women are 50% of the population in the US and globally, okay? So it has implications for women and their career. Number one, it means that you are starting at a lower salary. Just even if it's the same job, and in a recent poll, 63% of women were paid less to start in an equivalent job as men. 63%. So you start behind, and then you never catch up. It's why the discussion about not being able to ask what you made at your last job is something that may help to rectify this pay gap, because it's an important one to think about. The second thing it does on a broad stroke is it impacts families and children. So in recent research, 49% of employed women and 42% of working women who have children are the primary wage earner. So when we pay women less, we're paying children less. We're paying families less. That then rolls into implications for the economy. Because, oh, by the way, it's estimated that women make 70 to 80% of the consumer purchasing decisions. So if the person who's deciding has access to less money, what does that do to the economy, right? And it becomes this this cycle, right? So now you've impacted the woman herself and her career, you've impacted families and children, and now you're impacting the economy. When you add the intersectionality of ethnicity on top of gender, the compounding effect is even more devastating. The population that's growing in the US, the segment of the population as a percentage of the total, are communities of color. It's higher birth rates. The populations tend to be younger. So now all of a sudden, we've got a bigger segment of the US population, and this is happening on a global basis as well, but let's keep it in the US. We have a bigger segment of the US population that is less capable economically of participating in that economy and of helping to drive that economy. There was some research recently by Oxfam that also talked about this huge percentage of unpaid or underpaid work. It's the work that's done in service to the family and at home. And the estimate is, if that were paid for work, it would be 3 times the contributor to the economy that the technology sector currently is. 3 times. So as we think about this disparity between what women earn and what men earn, and between what women of color earn and what people in general earn, it's not just about me or you, it's about our children. It's about our family. It's about, ultimately, as you think about some of the legislative issues, right? Think about what this is doing to the tax base, to the ability to support public infrastructure, to a pipeline, right? To keep us not only healthy within our communities, but competitive within the global economy. So when we think about the gender pay gap, the opportunity is on multiple levels. The first opportunity is most people don't necessarily understand it as something that impacts them. So if you get it, that if you care about either your family, your children, or the quality of life in your community, or the quality and the health of the US economy, and that there's a direct link between all of that and the gender pay gap, then tell somebody else. Because we all need to understand that this is an issue that impacts all of us. The second level of opportunity is clearly what we've been talking about relative to women and the power to vote. We have an opportunity to identify and support candidates who understand the link between the gender pay gap and the quality of life for all of us. Talk to your local elected officials about what are they doing to support that issue. And then as you go to the ballot box, and I think we made the point about going to the ballot box, then let's vote accordingly relative to making sure that we all get appropriately compensated for the value that we deliver.
Just recently, there was a New York Times article entitled, "What Does This Country Demand of Black Women in Politics?" And Patty, one of your students at the campaign school, Congressman Lauren Underwood, is quoted in the article. Lauren, I think was in my class actually, is the first woman and first woman of color to represent her majority white district, which is Illinois 14. So Patty, talk to us about.
So it's a fabulous story.
It's a
It's a great story. So Lauren Underwood, registered nurse, had served on a number of Health and Human Services committees during the Obama administration, came to our school in 2014 and said, I know I want to run sometime. I don't know what I want to run for, but I know I definitely want to run for office someday. Well, that someday came. I always say 2018 was the year of the woman of color, running and winning. You know, they were women of color were the story in 2018. So Lauren comes and announces that she is going to run for Congress from her district 14. The Democratic Party was not happy. Who are you? You know, we don't know you. There were 7 or 8, I don't know, white men who also were in that primary. So she really had to build what I call all the time her own political love tribe. People who were going to be for Lauren and only for Lauren 24/7. You can imagine how difficult it was for her to raise money, but she was lovingly relentless about it. And just went out there and blew it out. Not only did she win the primary, but really left the guys in the dust. I mean, nobody even came close. That's how well she ran and won the primary. Now, the thing that inspired her to run in the first place were the many, many conversations that she had with her congressman about health care. She had a health care issue herself, and he said, oh, I'm all about health care. I'm going to work with you on this. You know, when did she get that call about working with the 10th of never, right? And so she just said, I'm going to run. I'm running. So she wins the primary. And now, of course, the minute you win, everybody loves a winner. The party couldn't do enough for her, right? So then she had to develop a plan to beat out a 20-year incumbent, predominantly white, conservative district. She did it handily. And now she is the youngest woman of color, 32 years old, who's ever served in Congress. To say that we are proud of her, that she's one of ours, is an understatement. The Italian mom on duty. So when we started our first class was in '94. The majority of the women at that time who were contending our 5-day intensive were predominantly white and in their mid-40s. And they were at a point in their lives where their kids were launched, their husbands were retired, so they really wanted to get out and do something. They were retired themselves and had always wanted to be political, had always wanted to run for office. Fast forward to 2000, so it had pretty much stayed predominantly white women at the school until 2007, which I affectionately refer to as the Obama phenomenon. An explosion of women of color who are taking time off from work and school to work on Barack Obama's campaign. They loved it so much. I mean, those of you who are political, right? You get the bug and you're like, yeah, why not me? I can do this. I'm up for this. And they started finding themselves coming to our school. So fast forward now, we just graduated 2019. So since really 2008, our median age is 29, 30. And the majority of the women who attend our school are women of color. And I'm so proud of that because that doesn't just happen. You gotta work it. You go to places no one else goes to. That mental piece is key, I think, key. But you know, women of color in my world have always been the risk takers in my life. They're like, what are you holding back for? Do it, just do it. And again, just like, yeah, they're right. Why am I holding myself back? I'm just gonna get out there and do it. So that has been what has been probably my greatest joy, has been seeing women of color become the majority of our school every year.
That's amazing. So we've done a lot of talking about the public sector, and we're going to turn to the private sector now, which is actually half of our panel. It really represents the private sector in many ways. Cheryl, you've been at the forefront of efforts in the private sector and at your company to empower and promote women at Pitney Bowes. And so can you talk about the solutions there? What has driven that kind of women's empowerment in this big public company?
Actually, a lot of things have, but let me start off with a more personal story, right? So I have a degree in human biology from Stanford University. And so I always say that my first communications job was convincing my parents why I wasn't going into medicine. And so here we sit. I think they're kind of satisfied that I've been able to earn a living. But I start with that story because I was probably, I don't know, a year or two, maybe 3 years out of Stanford. And I was moving from California to Texas. And I was applying for jobs in marketing, communications, that whole area. And I found a job listing, and that was during the days there was not the internet. And so I sent in my resume, and I got notice that I had gotten the interview, and I was so excited. And I remember putting on my little suit and strutting in. And I just got this sense when the receptionist saw me, she was a little surprised. And she said, "You are," and I said, "I'm here to interview for the job." And she said, "Oh, thank you." So I sat there, still, I'm calm. I hear the heels clicking of the person who's gonna interview me coming around the corner. And then when she saw me, she stopped and she said, "But you looked so good on paper." And I was too young and inexperienced to understand how incredibly illegal that was. But we all knew, she knew, I knew, the receptionist knew, that literally my interview was over before it began. And so she went through with some semblance of an interview, but it was over. And so I purposed in my heart that they were the ones that missed out, right? And so, 30 years later, having been speechwriter for 3 CEOs and done investor communications and spoken around the world and done just all kinds of things, it confirms for me every time something happens that they missed out. But I also purposed that I wanted to be part of an environment where that didn't happen to people, where no one would have to face that. Now, part of the thing that kind of shook me, that was, like later in the 80s when that happened, more than 30 years earlier. My father-in-law was in the 2nd class at Harvard Business School to have African Americans, and he was one of 2. After he graduated from Harvard B School, he could not get a job for over a year. Sometimes, based on where he went undergraduate, they wouldn't even grant the interview. Other times, the same thing happened to him when he walked through the door. So it happened to him in the 50s, it happened to me in the 80s. So part, very selfishly, of my purpose in my heart was I don't want it to happen to my daughter. I don't want that to be the case. So when you think about Pitney Bowes, and Denise talked about World War I, right? And how we had to utilize women. Very similarly, Walter Wheeler, and 1920 was a great year. Pitney Bowes will be 100 in April, and we are so thrilled. And you don't get to be 100 without learning a few things along the way, is what we've decided. And one of the things that happened, Walter Wheeler, our chairman, starting in the 30s all the way through to the 60s, he had a long tenure as CEO, really a visionary guy. And President Roosevelt, drafted him, if you will, to be on the War Production Board for World War II. And that board kind of helped coordinate production resources here in the US to be used in the war effort. And so he took a leave of absence from the company to do that, but he'd come back to Stanford on the weekends, and he was a very prolific writer. So we know that he wrote about how he noticed on the factory floors, right, with 35% of men in the US 18 and older gone. He noticed both in terms of the battlefield and the production floor, that we had to bring in women, right, people of color, and the disabled. And what he noticed from both the stories he heard from the battlefield and what he saw when he would come in on the weekends and see how the company was doing, he saw the same work ethic, he saw the same quality of work, and he saw the same commitment to getting it done. And he said, you know what? If this is what happens when we open up and have a greater variety of people in the company, this is what I want. So in 1942, he wrote a memo and he said, I want to make sure that we have nothing that precludes talented people from being employed at Pitney Bowes, irrespective of gender or race or religion. That was 1942. And then he continued to write about the efficacy, if you will, of the fact that talent didn't know any boundaries in terms of gender or ethnicity or age or ability and what that could mean to the American workforce. So we have at Pitney Bowes this incredibly rich legacy of understanding the direct connection between our ability to serve our markets and making sure we have access to the best talent, period. Everybody who employs someone is making an investment. Why on earth would we not seek to optimize the value of our investment? So we want to make sure that we create this inclusive environment where everyone's voice is heard, where everyone has this opportunity to grow and develop, where it is safe to be who you are authentically, because we know if we unleash that, then you will perform your best, and that in turn allows us to perform our best. So we have a Women's Inclusion Network, and we call it PB Win. And our slogan is, when we win for women, we win with women. So I don't know if the stats are, the stats are there, right? We're pretty proud. So we talk about diversity is our reality at Pitney Bowes. When we're 49% people of color, 43% women globally, when our board of directors, 45% women, and women head half of all board committees, when 31% of our senior management are women, diversity is our reality. Inclusion is what fuels our ability, we believe, to perform and to perform well. And I shared with the group, we just announced, we made the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index for the second year in a row, and we just received designation as Forbes Best Employer for Diversity. And that didn't happen overnight, but we were very intentional about it and very focused on it. But really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is deliver our best to our clients, and we need the best people on the planet to do that.
So workplace sexual harassment is a profound and chronic barrier, of course, to the advancement of women. Gretchen, your experiences, your book, your leadership have really inspired so many to speak up about their experiences and really create action around this challenge. You've written a great book on this. Please share with us some thoughts on workplace harassment as well as what has to happen to this end.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that now I know why Cheryl and I wore red tonight, because we both went to Stanford. So go Cardinal.
Go Cardinal.
And it's apropos because actually Stanford was, what helped me to embark into the workplace. And unfortunately, I faced assault and harassment before I ever really even got into my first job. So when I was trying to break into the TV business, and I had just completed my senior year at Stanford, I thought I was doing what we teach our young people to do, which is to step outside of the box and to go out and try and get a job and cold call people that you've never met before. And I did just that. And I went to New York City, and I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, so New York was not necessarily someplace that was just going to make me feel immediately comfortable. And I met with this very top executive in television, and he spent a lot of time with me. He made a lot of calls for me. And I thought, wow, he's really respecting my smarts and my ambition. And we went to dinner, and afterwards we were in a town car, and he was dropping me off at my Stanford best friend's apartment. And before I knew it, he was on top of me with his tongue down my throat, and I was doing everything in my power to escape. And somehow I was able to get the driver to stop the car, and I rolled out and got up to my friend's apartment. Of course, I blamed myself, and I cried, and I never told anyone else for 25 years. 3 weeks later, I was in Los Angeles trying to do the same thing, cold called the top PR executive in the business to help me get a start in television. And again, unfortunately, in a car. We were going to dinner. We never even got there because when I closed the passenger door, he took my neck in his hand and he pushed my head into his crotch so hard I couldn't breathe. And I managed to escape from him as well. And again, I told nobody for 25 years until my first book, my memoir, in 2015. I eventually got to my first job in Richmond, Virginia as a cub reporter. And ironically, the first story that I covered was the Anita Hill hearings. And I remember calling my mother and saying to her, why do these men not believe her? She's telling the truth. And I then went and covered a story in a rural part of Virginia with my photographer, and I was promptly sexually harassed on the job. And in that case, we got back into the car, and he started saying lewd things to me about how he had put a microphone like this one up onto my blouse, and how had I enjoyed it when he had touched my breasts. And it went downhill from there. And I actually envisioned myself rolling out of the passenger car door like I had seen happen in movies and wondering how much it might hurt. So I experienced a lot of horrible things in a short period of time as a young woman, aged 22 and then 23. And what did we do about it back then? We did nothing about it. Because women are socialized to put all those horrible things deep down into our soul and never think about them ever again. And certainly not tell anyone. Why? Because we know how we're going to be treated, right? First of all, we're not going to be believed. Then we're going to be maligned. Then we're going to lose our job. And then we're going to be retaliated against. And then we're going to be demoted and blacklisted and never work again. So we don't say anything. And we just put our nose to the grindstone, and we work even harder, and we hope that the next person's going to respect us for our smarts. So fortunately for me, I went on to have a sexual harassment-free career from after Richmond to Cincinnati to Cleveland to Dallas to CBS News in New York and then to Fox. And when all of that hard work of getting to the top of my profession, when I realized in 2016 that that was going to be taken away from me and it wasn't going to be my choice, I had been planning and determined at that point in time that if I don't jump off this cliff by myself, who will? And just as we've heard on this panel earlier tonight, I did it for my children. And for yours. But I was all alone. This was 15 months before the Me Too movement. This was 15 months before the Harvey Weinstein allegations. And the one thing my lawyer said to me was, you're gonna be maligned, and I was, by my colleagues and by a bunch of other people. But an amazing thing started to happen. And trust me, I didn't know what was gonna happen the next minute, much less the next day. But I was buoyed by all of these women that started reaching out to me. And they started telling me their stories of shame and agony and pain. And while it was so hard to listen to in my good Minnesota values, I was writing them all back. My parents had taught me to always write thank you notes, so I'm like, I'm gonna get to all these women, and I started printing out their stories in my home office. First it was dozens, and it was hundreds, and it was thousands. And I didn't even realize that this was a pervasive epidemic in our society. And that's when I realized I had to do something about it. And a lot of people said to me, well, you could have just gone home, spent more time with your kids. And if there's been one constant in my life, it's been that I take a challenge head on. And so I was determined that I was going to try and fix this. Well, fixing sexual harassment in the workplace is a tangled web. There's no silver bullet solution. So let me just go through some of the top things that I've been working on and that I think are essential to fixing. The first thing is that we have to believe women. That may sound pretty easy, but that's a huge, almost insurmountable task. But I'm proud to say that in the last 3.5 years since my case, we are believing women. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that so many women just flooded openly on social media when the Me Too movement started. Tarana Burke started the whole term 10 years ago, but then when the floodgates opened more recently. And women could either put their name and face to their story, or they could be anonymous. But tons of them came forward. And men were facing consequences. They were getting fired. I mean, we've made huge strides on just those two things. And we all know up here on the panel and in the audience that cultural shifts do not happen quickly. So I'm very proud that we've come that far in a short period of time. So believing women, consequences. But here are things that we can do in the workplace to help this mission. We need to change the way in which we report this issue. Human resources is not the place to go and report sexual harassment. And I know there are a lot of great people who work in HR. But let's face it, HR works for the company. They don't work for the employee. And what happens is when a woman goes to complain to HR, it's all over. Because from that moment on, they're going to figure out how to get rid of you. Now, it's my hope that companies will start to bring in independent contractors to handle these situations, ombudsmen of sorts, so that they don't have any affiliation with the company, and so that they really look at the claims and figure out through a private and independent investigation what really happened. That would be huge. Changing laws, which we're going to get to in the next question. I've been a huge advocate of doing that over the last 3 years. Training in the workplace. Most of the training programs, if any of you have done them at work, they're cover your ass facades. In fact, in recent years, you just do them on your computer. And in talking to tons of executives over the last couple of years, they just have their assistants do them. So training needs to completely change. They need to get serious about it, number one. But you need to talk about bystanders and enablers. That's the number one thing to changing the culture, is to empower those people to also come forward and say, I saw that. Because guess what happens for the most part now? They don't do that. Because guess what happens to the person who helps the other person? They promptly get blacklisted, demoted, and fired. So training the right way is essential. And then educating our boys. It's the number one lesson that I've learned. If we really are going to change our culture with regard to respecting women, paying them fairly, promoting them, putting in the boardroom, not sexually harassing them, it starts at an early age. It starts with my son. When I came home from doing a CNN town hall 2 years ago, he was waiting for me in the kitchen. Mommy, Was that other woman on TV with you? Was she telling the truth, Mommy, when she said that once every 73 seconds in our country a woman is sexually assaulted or harassed? Mommy, is that true? And I said, I'm so sorry to tell you that that is true. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, Mommy, as a young man, I want to help fix that. He was 12. That is how we change this problem.
So one of the goals of tonight, you've heard this already said, is to raise up women's voices, to believe women, to tell their stories, to give a platform for that. And we just love the name of Gretchen's new organization, Lift Our Voices. So Gretchen, if you can follow up then on what you've been talking about, on non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, and how they're really protecting this illegal harassment that's rampant in corporate culture.
Thank you. So this is a huge chunk of it, changing laws, and we have politicians in the room so they can understand how important this is. What companies have been doing over the last 20 years to keep sexual harassment and other human rights violations under wraps, they have been putting in employment contracts arbitration clauses. The intent of arbitration was never to adjudicate human rights violations. It was for small business disputes and not for gender discrimination or sexual harassment. But companies figured out, wow, if we put this in our employee's contract before they even start the job, and we happen to get into some dirty laundry, phew, just hide it. Because arbitration is a secret process. And that's what's been happening over the last 25 years, since the Supreme Court ruled on arbitration. Companies put these clauses in, women come to work, they sign on the dotted line, never expecting to get into any kind of a workplace dispute. And then they go to complain, and remember, they go to HR, and again, HR goes, phew, no one will ever know about this, because she's going to the secret chamber. Here's what happens in arbitration. You don't get the same amount of witnesses, you don't get the same amount of depositions. There are no appeals. You can't tell anyone what happened to you. You never work again, because now you don't work at your company anymore, but you can't tell your next future employer why you don't work at that company anymore, and you don't have any references. And here's the worst part. The perpetrator, in many cases, gets to stay on the job because nobody knows about it. So the sexual harassment continues. So I have been fighting to change that on Capitol Hill. And the only way we're going to get this done is in a bipartisan fashion. So I have 2 senators and 2 members of the House from both parties who are sponsors of my bill. It's the Ending Arbitration Act of Sexual Harassment. We introduced it in December of 2017, and then a bunch of other stuff started happening on the way. We reintroduced it in the House in February. I testified before the House in May. But here's the great thing. We're going to pass this thing. The impeachment is over because the #1 co-sponsor of my bill happens to be the head of judiciary, which is Lindsey Graham. I know you're surprised, but he's in favor of getting rid of arbitration with regard to gender discrimination and sexual harassment. And Kirsten Gillibrand is my other co-sponsor on that side. So we're going to get this done. It's going to be, I think it's going to be the biggest achievement in this entire fight. I like to call it the final part of the tipping point, because companies will no longer be able to use this tool to cover up what's really happening. NDAs are the second part of the puzzle, because it's the second way we keep this entire issue silent. I have an NDA. There are movies being made and miniseries, and I can't participate at all. I can't say even if they're accurate. My family can't say if they're accurate. My children can't, my husband can't. It's too late for me, probably. But I'm bound and determined to make sure that I give every woman and man in this country their voice back. And so, organically, every day in my life is something new. And so 6 weeks ago, there was a story at NBC that they were gonna let their women out of NDAs if they had signed them purportedly. And a group of us at Fox got together that night and said, really? Then we're gonna demand that Fox News let us out as well. We haven't heard from them yet. But that organically led into our new organization, Lift Our Voices, which is our new nonprofit. And we are bound and determined to eradicate NDAs as well for women and men in our country. So if you'd like to join our fight, you can go to liftourvoices.com and you can join our army, and you can also donate to us as we are going all across the country to educate people about these issues.
That's great. On the theme of lifting women's voices and examining them, Denise, Amy Klobuchar recently said in a presidential debate that women in politics are held to a higher standard than men. Do you agree with that? Who is saying that? Why are they saying that? And what can be done to really eliminate that double standard?
If I could interrupt for just one moment, I apologize. There's a Subaru parked in the back here, right next to the garbage bin. It's got a luggage rack on top, and the school bus cannot leave until that gate is moved. So if anyone has a Subaru with a luggage rack on top, they can park the bucket off to get the
Subaru with a luggage rack? Okay, exactly the double standard.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it comes full circle, doesn't it? Because now you're hearing the story of someone who is the inheritor of the activism, and you see what we've been able to accomplish. And, I mean, of course we're held to a different standard. There's just no doubt about it. Everything from clothing to lifestyle. But what's, I especially resent the recent notion, and this also goes to what Amy was saying, that somehow a woman cannot win for president of the United States because she's a woman, right? Because Hillary lost, therefore a woman cannot win. I hate that argument, because how many men have lost places? And there you have it. And we all buy into it somehow, even, like sort of subtly. And that's what has to change. And what has to change is women have to support women. You have to vote for women. You have to see them as capable and leaders. You have to support them with your money. Frankly, women are very poor donors to campaigns. Women in the same family, the men give twice as much money to the campaigns of their choice as women do, even very well-heeled women. But especially when you hear what we've been able to accomplish through the courageous actions of people like Gretchen, we would never have been able to pass things like the legislation we passed right here in Connecticut this year without people who have come forward and given this attention. We passed affirmative consent on public college campuses. No means no. We never could have passed that 5 years ago. And so there's a result right there. And this is all because of the activism of women. We are the inheritors of those women 100 years ago that got us the right to vote. That's what this is all about. And you're seeing the results. We could have passed up, we have something called the Time's Up Act, change the statute of limitations from 1 to 5 years on sexual harassment and rape charges. We passed the Family and Medical Leave Act in Connecticut, the strongest one in the country. Could we have passed that without the support and activism of women? No, we could not. And we have that now for the first time in a long, long time. And it is because people are speaking up. Me Too, all these movements, they have made already a difference. And I think it's going to continue. I really think we have found our voice, and that we are gonna continue to make progress because we're working together. And I think of those women back, chaining themselves to the White House. That's where we are, and that's maybe what we have to do to get progress on these issues. So I want to thank Gretchen. I've never heard the whole story before, and it's
That's only
amazing.
part of it. How much time do you have? Although I can't tell you because I got an NDA.
It's great. I love to see the progress, but it is definitely true. We are held to a different standard, and by God, let's make it real.
That's great. I don't know about you, but I could sit here all night listening to these ladies. They're so inspirational. We did have some round robin questions that we're going to quickly go through, and we do have some audience questions. So I'll try to respect your time and be efficient about this. And maybe I'll start with something that I think all four of you were interested in answering, which was if you could give advice to your younger self, and this is something that we often ask just to empower the younger women in our lives. If you could give advice to your younger self, teens, 20s, 30s, what advice would you give during each of those time periods? Or in any of them? Who would like to start?
I'll start. That's fine. I have a list. Stop saying sorry.
Yes.
I've noticed this so much over the last 3 years especially. Women say sorry about 50 times a day. You walk into a building and you're gonna run into them, sorry. We have to stop saying sorry. Stop feeling guilty about everything. Stop being so damn nice. Stop feeling like you need to shave your legs every day. I'm serious. We have to live up to all this stuff that's just ridiculous. And then, of course, in a little more sincerity, embrace failures and take more risks. Women, we are socialized to color inside of the lines and to not speak up. Color outside of the lines. Take a little tiny risk. And when you succeed after you've taken that risk, you're going to do it the next time and you're going to take even a little bit bigger.
Go down the line, Denise.
I found this the hardest question of all, honestly. I don't have a list like that. I took too many risks. All the time. I think I would have said to myself, have a better plan. It kind of all worked out, but it could have been different too. The times have changed so much since, I'm a lot older than you are. So it's changed a lot since I was young, but in my day, all the women were going to be nurses or teachers from my graduating class in high school. I didn't do either of those things. I sort of took off to Europe and hung out for several years. I studied music too, to be fair. So I guess that would be my chief advice to myself. If you're going to take risks, make sure you have someplace to land.
That's great. Cheryl?
This was also one I kind of struggled with. I guess the main thing would be understand that the power of networking is not what others can do for you, but what you can offer them.
Yeah.
Because when you say, hey, tell me more about what you're doing. Everyone loves to be listened to, and no one turns down help. And then what you find, instead of this kind of just-in-time networking, oh, I need something, and you're now dialing my number, we formed a relationship, and we formed a mutually beneficial one. So I think networking would probably be mine.
Patty?
I think mine would be to continue to feel very, very comfortable being uncomfortable all the time. It's fun. Jump in. Jump in. To Gretchen's point about learning how to fail fabulously, I'm really good at that. So a couple of times a year, I'm invited to speak at the Clinton Foundation, and it's always a panel of 2 women and 2 men. And that year, one of the women was sick, so it was just me and 2 guys, and 2 very celebrity guys. And one of the questions was, can you give us all, this is for the panel, can you give us all examples of how you came back from failing fabulously. Oh God, I can't think of anything. They're looking at each other. I'll take it. I got it, guys. I got it. So I'm giving examples of ways in which I, have learned to become resilient and, zoom into plan B and then figure out what that's going to be, right? And then one of the guys very sheepishly, very meekly said, well, I remember a time that I almost failed. It's like being a little bit pregnant. No. So the challenge for guys isn't it sad that we don't allow our men to not fail fabulously? Come on in, guys. It feels good. That's where you learn how full and vibrant and how amazing life can be when you're not worried about offending somebody, when you're not, I just don't say I'm sorry anymore, and just like practicing all that. The power in your language. I had a great Girl Scout leader, Mrs. Dill, for 8 years. She never said, who can help me? I need one of you to come up to help me. She said, I need a leader. Who wants to be a leader with me? I still talk about it at the school every year, right? Who wants to be yeah. So when I work with young women, who wants to be a leader with me? And they're like, okay. Put that hand up. Just all those kinds of things. And when you think about it, I was almost a nun. Wanted to be a nun. That's when I started my life when I was 10 years old. I was in love with Rosalind Russell and, what's her name, the flying nun. I was like, yeah, I want to do that. What? And serve God. So, considering.
Okay, great. So one of the audience, that's true. So one of the audience questions, and really one of the questions that we were planning on, and then this might be a really good place to leave it tonight, is empowering other women and girls. What does that look like? What can we share with the audience? Some really concrete ways people can take away with tonight to empower the women and girls in our lives, to change the structures and barriers that we see around us. And can I start with you again, Rachel, on that one?
Yeah, sure. So I think it starts with the way in which we parent, obviously. I was fortunate enough to have parents who told me every single day that I could be whatever I wanted to be. And they put the caveat, it's going to come with a tremendous amount of hard work. But I believe them from a young age. And so I think that is essential. You'd be surprised how many people have never heard that. So if you haven't heard it, know that you can be whatever you want to be. Also, there was a recent study that I think about every day because it's so disappointing to me and makes me realize how much more we have to do. It came out of Columbia and a couple other universities with 5- and 6-year-old girls and boys. At 5 years old, they say to them, here's a smart statement, who could have said it? And the girls and boys at 5 years old say, either a man or a woman. By the time the girls are 6, they say it can only be a man. What happens between 5 and 6? Who are predominantly the teachers? Women. How many culturally embedded things are we teaching still our young kids in 2020? But we don't intend to do that. It's like saying I'm sorry every 5 seconds. So we have to take a step back and really think a lot about our language first and foremost. I know I've changed completely as to how I even speak to my own kids, and my daughter made me realize it last year when I was driving them to school, and I said, hey guys, let's go, and she goes, Mom, I'm not a guy. Sounds like it's not a big deal, but think about the language that you are saying to young people all the time.
Well, I think of many of the organizations now that have sprung up to help build the confidence that we're talking about in girls are very meaningful. I think of the Girl Scouts. You know, in my day, I was a Girl Scout, but it was kind of it kind of went into eclipse for a long time. Now they are doing spectacular work, a lot with young women of color, to build that confidence and character. and role models that they develop through that process. It's a wonderful organization, and it really has enhanced the lives of literally millions of young girls. So organizations like that, if you can support them, I think there are organizations that work on this sort of things. I hope we can build some sort of mentoring for women who are in office. You know, we did found the school many years ago to try to build that confidence and the mentorship, and I think it has worked spectacularly well. And there are many, many now. I don't know how many graduates you have now. Thousands, literally. And they are now in positions of various kinds around the world. We have a lot of women from other countries who have benefited from this kind of training. But that kind of training cannot be overestimated. It's really, and that is its primary purpose, is not necessarily just to run for office. It really is to build that confidence in you, you know, and the team that kind of springs up, the relationships that you build in a situation like that. There are other training models like that, but anything you can do. I always wondered what the impact was of the fact that I went to an all-girls high school for 2 years, and then I transferred to a public school. But I think that, you know, it's kind of out of fashion now, I guess, but the fact is in an all-girls high school, the girls are the leaders, the girls are the captains of the sport teams, and you sort of have that model to build on, I think, for the rest of your life. So it's an interesting thought.
Cheryl?
So there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So when I think about empowering women and girls, it works on 2 levels. On the first level, we need to socialize and teach our girls how to work with each other, women and girls, how to work with each other, both across generations and within, you know, this whole concept of teaming and being able to achieve better results collectively than we can individually. We want to make sure that we have that and we instill that in women and girls. The second level, however, is I'm so proud of the men who are in this room, because if we are only talking about these topics to other women, we're leaving out the people that we need as allies to make it different. The Pitney Bowes Women's Inclusion Network is open to men, and we have men coming to all of our events and participating. Really, really important to teach women and girls about the necessity of including men in the effort to provide equity.
Now, do you want to close us out?
Well, so I'm thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King in this moment, and I'm thinking about his dream, and I'm thinking about what each and every one of us can do to honor that dream, and what we can do is do the work. Whatever you define that work to be. You know my lane. I love my lane. I pretty much stay in my lane. I do a lot of assertiveness training programs for young girls so that they learn how to be a leader in their own lives, in the driver's seat. But now I'm doing a lot of mother-daughter programming for moms who didn't have the kind of moms that we obviously had, who told us we could be anything, you know, that we wanted. Because here I am doing assertiveness training for the young women, and they're saying, "Will you talk to my mom? You know, will you talk to my mom?" And I said, "Well, let's have a breakfast. You know, let's you know." And that's where the magic has been, I have to say, is bringing in those moms who are also learning how to talk to and connect with their daughters as well, and where they are. And that has been so rewarding and life transforming for me to see, because you can see that relationship shifting within the hour that you're working with the moms and the daughters. So that has been something that has been my dream come true.
Wow. On behalf of the YWCA of Greenwich, as well as our 36 community partners, again, thank you all for being with us. Thank you to our esteemed panel. We really appreciate your partnership and marking Dr. King's birthday. So have a great evening.